The 1964 Civil Rights Act tied federal funds to desegregation. Now Medicare, with its promise of federal funds, created an opportunity to end the shocking inequalities in medical care.
In our town, we could not use the hospital. It's called Parkview Hospital. For her final pregnancy, my mom was going to need a C-section. The baby was big. Dad went to the administrator at the hospital to say, could she please be delivered there? And they refused. She went into labor. They couldn't get her to the colored ward, so they delivered her at home. And my brother, I'm gonna have a hard time with this. My brother sustained a stroke because of it. That moment is why I'm a physician. It also was the defining moment for me about what disparities really were.
Yazoo City at that time was totally segregated. And one of my jobs as a young person was to answer the back door, which is where the colored office was. There would be someone who was so wounded, they would have to go to a hospital. So they would have to go to Jackson, which was 50 miles away. People routinely died on the trip to Jackson because there was no hospital in Yazoo City that would take blacks.
Segregation made it difficult even to get to the hospital. White-operated ambulances would not pick up black patients.
They had to use hearses. Hearses that were not in use were used as ambulances, and many black doctors reflected on the bitter irony of this because as the hearse plied from town to town like a Flying Dutchman, looking for a hospital, someone who would treat this patient, the patient often died in the back seat of the hearse.
Congress passed the 1946 Hill-Burton Act, which provided for the construction and renovation of hospitals throughout the country.
It was a really large financial package that was going to transform the facilities of American hospitals. To get it through the Congress, the legislative process had to deal with the Southerners, and they insisted on a separate but equal clause that would permit segregation in hospital facilities.
What it said was, go ahead, keep your segregated hospitals in the South, and the federal government will support you and subsidize the expansion of Jim Crow.
Black doctors could not get hospital privileges once they finished their training because they were barred from their local medical society. As a result, they could not admit their patients to the hospital or treat them there. These county medical societies were affiliates of the AMA, which refused to end these discriminatory practices.
The hospital is the workplace of doctors. Who determines who's going to be on the medical staff is the doctors themselves. All the doctors in these hospitals were white. They were admitting white patients, so that if you wanted to charge them with segregation, the doctors would say, well, we're practicing in this neighborhood, we serve our patients are white, this is our hospital. That's the essence of what you mean by institutional racism, right? It isn't something that you can pinpoint in terms of an action, it's built into the structure.
The legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them.
Hospital desegregation was gaining more visibility, but the breakthrough they had all been fighting for was led by a dentist in North Carolina.
One civil rights activist, a dentist named George Simpkins, contacted the Legal Defense Fund. It was not the first time. He'd been put in jail for trying to integrate a golf course. And he was a local gadfly, and he was a courageous man. And he said, I want to bring a lawsuit to get staff privileges at the white hospitals in Greensboro.
In the South, almost all of the cases, either against hospitals or schools, were brought by dentists. They were totally independent and therefore had a degree of freedom that even the black physicians in these communities did not have.
To respond to the complaints and desegregate the hospitals, HEW faced the impossible task of suing every hospital that failed to comply with Title VI. But a new law would present a different alternative. With the 1964 presidential election looming, President Johnson made the passage of Medicare a priority. This new legislation would provide an unexpected way to enforce civil rights in hospitals.
25% of the revenues of hospitals would be coming as a result of the Medicare program. How could the federal government begin the Medicare program and give federal funds to already discriminatory hospitals? This Office for Civil Rights at HEW, which didn't exist until January of '66, had the talented people that were there, the people who had lived through the civil rights issues, working for the NAACP, working in local communities.
So this was not the AMA. This was not the American Hospital Association telling them how to inspect hospitals. This was the civil rights movement that had, in fact, basically taken over.
Our job is to inspect hospitals, write down what we saw, make it clear to the administrators what the law required, and then move on.
And then, of course, they didn't find what we told them to look for because beds were switched.
We called it the DHEW shuffle. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare at that time was a big boss. And that they'd shuffle beds around if they knew we were coming.
And there was a lot of switching of charts to show that they had an integrated facilities. Signs were taken off doors, or pictures were hung over signs on doors that said colored, white, etc. But anyway, there was a lot of cover-up.
Secretary Gardner needed a team to inspect the hospitals resisting compliance. He sent out a call to every office in HEW asking for a staff to work as inspectors. More than 700 people responded and joined this passionate bureaucratic army. The recruits included laboratory scientists, veterinarians, nurses, pharmacists, and managers of Social Security field offices. Few had any faintly relevant experience.
People had to volunteer to be on the front edge of what seemed to be an impossible task. They would be putting in hundreds of hours a week. There would be sleepless nights. There would be threats, police departments that tried to harass them. They would deal with Klan members that would chase them. So the volunteers that they got were not typical civil servants. They were a group of really impassioned activists.
In a final attempt to bring more hospitals into compliance before the deadline, President Johnson called hospital administrators to the White House.
Now, we know there are going to be problems. One of them arises from compliance with the laws of the land, specifically the Civil Rights Act.
He said that the government is not going to retreat. And he made it very clear to them, if they did not desegregate, they would not get any money.
Overnight, thousands of hospitals desegregated. I mean, they made the decision that they weren't going to run the risk of losing that funding.
For all of those people that ended up being the volunteers, it was an amazing period. They really felt at the first time in their careers, they were really making a difference.
It doesn't mean there's not tremendous systemic racism determining what hospital someone goes to or where they live or how they're treated. We shouldn't be naive. But that last step of the dignity and care at a hospital that's given to you regardless of your race or your gender or your orientation or any other of these characteristics, that is a human right, that's an American right, and we help to achieve it by hospital desegregation.
It's so critical that we continue on this road of universal access to care, but beyond that, of trying to create the kind of environment where everybody has the opportunity to be healthy. So the world has changed, and for the better, I think.